The darkness of deep space stretched endlessly around the human expedition vessel Orion. Captain Darius Cole sat in his command chair, watching the data stream from their latest discovery. A massive, derelict structure orbiting a dead planet in an uncharted system. The station was ancient, its surface covered in strange markings that no known species had ever used. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the lead xenolinguist, studied the holographic display in front of her. These symbols, they don't match anything in the galactic database. Whatever this place is, it predates most known civilizations. Lieutenant Mason Reynolds, the ship's tactical officer, leaned closer. If it's that old, why hasn't it fallen apart? It looks preserved, almost like it was waiting for something. The Orion had been on a standard deep space survey mission when they detected the structure's faint energy signature. At first, they thought it was just another relic from a forgotten war, but something about this place felt different. "Let's take a closer look," Captain Cole ordered. "Send a probe inside." A small drone launched from the ship and glided toward the station's entrance. As it crossed the threshold, the ship's lights flickered. A strange hum echoed through the hull, and the air grew heavy with static. Dr. Carter frowned. "Something's happening. The station is activating." On the main screen, the drone's cameras showed a vast, empty interior. Metallic walls stretched high above, covered in symbols glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Then, without warning, the drone's signal cut out. A deep mechanical growl vibrated through the ship. What the hell was that? Reynolds grabbed his weapon instinctively. Before anyone could answer, the station erupted with energy. A crimson pulse radiated outward, washing over the ship. Every system went dark for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the lights flickered back to life, alarms blaring across the control panels. "We just triggered something," Dr. Carter whispered. The main screen now displayed new readings. Something massive was awakening beneath the planet's surface. The ground cracked apart, and a structure unlike anything they had ever seen began to rise. It wasn't just a station. It was a prison, and they had just opened it. "Captain, we need to leave. Now," Reynolds shouted. Cole didn't hesitate. "Fire up the engines. Get us out of here." The Orion roared to life, thrusters burning bright as it tried to break free from the planet's gravity. But before they could escape, a shadow passed over them. Something enormous moved in the darkness beyond the station. Then a voice, not a sound, but a thought, echoed in their minds. "You have made a fatal error." The screens filled with static. The ship's controls locked. Outside, a figure emerged from the ruins, its eyes glowing like twin stars. It was not a machine, nor was it truly organic. It was something beyond comprehension, something built for one purpose: hunting. And now, the hunt had begun. The Orion was trapped. The ship's engines roared, but it couldn't break free from the unseen force gripping it. Captain Cole's hands clenched into fists as he stared at the swirling mass of static on the main screen. The strange entity below had spoken, not through sound, but directly into their minds. It was intelligent, and it was angry. Dr. Carter frantically scanned the ship's systems. "Something is jamming our communication. We can't send a distress signal." "Weapons are offline too," Lieutenant Reynolds added. His face was pale, but his voice remained steady. "We're sitting ducks." Then the ship shuddered violently. A deep guttural hum reverberated through the hull, as if something was testing its defenses. The exterior cameras flickered back online, and what they saw sent a wave of fear through the crew. A colossal shape loomed just beyond the station, shifting in the darkness. It was unlike any spacecraft they had ever seen. Its hull was black as the void, pulsing with veins of molten red light. It moved with unnatural grace, circling them like a predator assessing its prey. "That's not a ship," Carter whispered. "That's something else." The being below spoke again, its voice an icy whisper in their minds. "You were not meant to awaken us. And now, you will face judgment." A sudden energy surge overloaded the ship's systems, plunging them into temporary darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie red shadows across the bridge. "Enough of this," Cole growled. "Reynolds, manually override the engines. We have to break free before it decides to rip us apart." Reynolds nodded and sprinted toward the engineering console, working furiously to bypass the lockdown. Meanwhile, Carter continued analyzing the strange signals. "Captain," she said hesitantly, "I don't think this is a standard attack. It's not just trying to destroy us. It's studying us." A cold realization settled over the crew. This wasn't a mindless predator. It was something far worse. A being of pure calculation, learning their weaknesses before striking. Outside, the massive shadow shifted again. Long, jagged limbs unfolded from its sides, moving with terrifying precision. It wasn't just observing anymore. It was preparing to strike. The ship jolted as a massive energy wave slammed into its shields. Warning lights flashed red. The Orion was breaking apart. Reynolds cursed. "We can't take another hit like that. We need tow." A sharp screech filled the air, cutting him off. The ship's AI, usually calm and mechanical, suddenly spoke in a broken, distorted voice. "Unknown entity detected. Threat level. Catastrophic. No escape. No hope. No." Then silence. Cole felt his pulse thunder in his ears. "Reynolds, now." Reynolds didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand down on the emergency override. The ship groaned as the engines burst back to life. The Orion surged forward, breaking free from the invisible grip holding it in place. The shadow twisted in response, letting out a sound that was almost amusement. As they escaped the planet's pull, Carter's screen flickered with one final message, one that hadn't come from their ship. "Run while you can. The hunt has just begun." The Orion tore through the void at full speed, engines burning hot as Captain Cole pushed the ship beyond its limits. No one spoke. The silence was filled only with the distant hum of overworked systems and the unshakable feeling that they were being watched. Lieutenant Reynolds kept his eyes locked on the sensors. "It's following us," he muttered. His voice was tight, controlled, but the tension was clear. Dr. Carter's hands hovered over her console, her breath shallow. "How fast is it?" Reynolds glanced at the readings. "Fast enough." On the main screen, the shadowy figure moved effortlessly through space. It had no thrusters, no visible propulsion. It simply existed, gliding through the void like a phantom. "We can't outrun it," Carter said, gripping the edge of her station. "It's playing with us." Cole exhaled sharply. "Then we stop running." Reynolds turned to him in shock. "Captain, with all due respect, if we're prey, we fight back." Cole's gaze was steady. "We can't just keep running until our fuel runs dry." A deep, resonant pulse shuddered through the ship. The lights flickered again. The entity wasn't just following them. It was closing in. Carter's console beeped with new readings. "Captain, it's inside the ship." A cold chill spread through the bridge. Cole's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. "What do you mean, inside?" "I don't know." Carter's voice cracked slightly. "It's not physically here, but it's seeping in. Like it's slipping through the ship's systems, rewriting the rules of reality itself." The air suddenly grew thick. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. A whisper, soft and almost gentle, drifted through the room. "You cannot hide." Reynolds drew his weapon instinctively, but what use was a gun against something that didn't follow the laws of the universe? A screeching noise filled the bridge, like metal bending in a storm. Carter's screen flared with unreadable symbols. "It's speaking again. It's..." She stopped abruptly, staring in horror at the translation appearing before her. "You are the first in 10,000 years to awaken us. We remember your kind. We have waited. And now, you will learn why the stars fear the dark." A sudden impact rocked the ship. The main lights failed, plunging them into a red-lit emergency mode. The thing was no longer playing. Cole made a decision. Turn the ship around. Reynolds hesitated. Captain, that's suicide. We're already dead if we do nothing. Cole snapped. We can't run, we can't hide. So we fight. The ship groaned as it shifted course. The Orion turned to face the entity. Weapons systems struggled to reboot, but they had little time. Then, the darkness moved. A shape, massive and unholy, loomed in the void before them. Eyes like burning stars opened across its surface. A jagged mouth, lined with shifting teeth, parted slowly. And then it laughed. You said. The sound wasn't just laughter. It was something deeper, something ancient and cruel, vibrating through the ship's hull and into the bones of every crew member. It was a sound that had no right to exist in the vacuum of space. Yet it filled the Orion like a living presence. The bridge crew sat frozen, staring at the monstrous thing before them, their minds struggling to comprehend what they were truly facing. Captain Cole forced himself to breathe. Weapons online. His voice was steady, but his grip on the armrest was white-knuckled. Reynolds worked furiously at his console. Almost there, Captain. The energy surge knocked out half our targeting systems, but I can get the railguns operational. Carter's screen continued to flicker with symbols she didn't recognize, but their meaning was clear. The entity wasn't just here to kill them. It was enjoying this. We shouldn't be able to hear it, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Sound doesn't travel in space. But we do hear it, Cole muttered. He could still feel the laughter echoing in his skull. This thing wasn't just a physical threat. It was inside them. The ship shuddered again, but there was no impact, no visible attack. Instead, something even worse happened. The stars outside changed. Reynolds cursed as his readings fluctuated wildly. Captain, I don't know how, but it's shifting reality around us. The star positions just changed in an instant. We aren't where we were a second ago. Cole's stomach turned. You're saying it moved us? Not just us, Carter said, eyes wide with horror. It moved space itself. The thing outside began to shift again, its form twisting unnaturally, like something pretending to be alive. The symbols on Carter's screen rearranged themselves, forming a single sentence in their language. You amuse us. A deep hum resonated through the ship. The emergency lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the crew saw something they were never meant to see. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't be. Limbs curled in impossible angles. Eyes, thousands of them, opened and closed in places where nothing should exist. And then the hum stopped. Captain, Reynolds whispered, his voice hollow. We need to fire. Now. Cole didn't hesitate. All weapons. Now. Reynolds slammed his hand onto the controls. The Orion's railguns roared to life, sending a volley of high-velocity rounds toward the entity. For the first time, the thing reacted. It didn't move to avoid the attack. It didn't even acknowledge the weapons until they were right upon it. Then, with an almost lazy motion, it consumed them. The projectiles disappeared into its shifting mass, vanishing as if they had never existed. The laughter returned, deeper now, vibrating through the very structure of the ship. The meaning was clear. That was your best. Cole's blood ran cold. They hadn't just failed to harm it. They had entertained it. The ship trembled under the weight of something unseen, something far beyond human comprehension. The railgun rounds had vanished as if they had never existed, swallowed into the abyss of the entity's shifting form. The bridge was silent except for the dull hum of failing systems and the distant, eerie laughter that resonated inside their skulls rather than their ears. Captain Cole forced himself to think. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. This thing wasn't just fast. It rewrote the rules of reality itself. Even now, the stars outside twisted unnaturally, as if the universe itself recoiled in fear of the being before them. Reynolds gripped the sides of his console, sweat dripping from his forehead. Captain, I don't think we can fight this thing. Carter's hands trembled over her screen. It's not just powerful. It's playing with us. It could have destroyed us the moment we encountered it, but it didn't. It wants something. Cole narrowed his eyes. Then we need to find out what. The laughter faded, replaced by an unnatural stillness. The void outside the ship no longer felt empty. It felt full, as if an ocean of unseen horrors pressed against the hull, waiting. Then, Carter's screen flashed with another message, written in perfect human script. You still do not understand. You are not in control. You never were. A chill ran through the bridge. The message wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. Before Cole could respond, the ship suddenly lurched forward. No thrusters fired. No external force was detected. The Orion was simply moved, yanked through space like a puppet on invisible strings. Navigation is unresponsive. Reynolds shouted, gripping the controls. It's taking us somewhere. Cole turned to Carter. Can you override it? She shook her head, panic in her eyes. No, it's like the ship isn't even ours anymore. The view screen flickered, and for the first time, they saw their destination. A structure, impossibly large, loomed ahead. It wasn't built. It had grown, a vast and grotesque assembly of shifting black tendrils and luminous, pulsating eyes. It defied geometry, its angles wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Carter gasped. That's not a station. That's a body. The realization hit Cole like a hammer. They weren't being taken to a place. They were being delivered to something else. The entity's voice returned, this time not as laughter, but as a whisper that slithered into their minds. You woke us. Now you will witness what sleeps beneath the stars. And then the ship crossed the threshold, swallowed whole by the darkness. The moment the Orion passed into the entity's domain, the universe itself seemed to shift. Colors no longer behaved as they should. Shadows stretched in directions that defied logic, and the very air inside the ship felt heavier, pressing down on the crew like an unseen weight. The bridge lights flickered erratically, as if the ship itself was struggling to resist whatever force had taken hold of it. Captain Cole clenched his fists, his breathing controlled but tense. They had been taken, dragged into something beyond human comprehension. No weapons had worked. No commands mattered. The ship was no longer their own. Yet, despite the overwhelming dread gnawing at him, he refused to accept that this was the end. Reynolds' hands were locked onto the controls, knuckles white. Captain, thrusters are offline. We're being pulled forward at a constant speed. There's nothing I can do to stop it. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. We're inside something. The sensors are picking up. Layers. She swallowed hard. Like we've entered a living organism, but it's massive. And it's studying us. Cole exhaled slowly. We need to figure out why it hasn't destroyed us. A sound echoed through the ship. Not the laughter from before, but something worse. A slow, deliberate breathing. As if the entity itself was exhaling around them, letting them know they were inside something that was very much alive. Then the main screen changed. It was no longer showing the incomprehensible void outside, but something new. A chamber. The architecture was a blend of organic and mechanical, its walls shifting and pulsing as if alive. In the center stood a figure. It was humanoid. Tall, impossibly thin, its elongated limbs too smooth, too perfect, yet undeniably wrong. Its face lacked features, only a dark void where eyes should be, yet Cole felt its gaze upon them. The whisper returned, wrapping around their minds like a servant. You are not the first to reach for power beyond your grasp. The crew stiffened as the figure moved, not by walking, but by existing in one place, and then another, without transition. It was in the center of the chamber, then suddenly closer, as if reality itself refused to track its movement. Carter's breath hitched. Captain, I don't think we're meant to leave. Cole locked eyes with the void where the figure's face should be. We need to find another way out. Reynolds looked up from his screen. What if there isn't one? The whispering laughter returned, colder than before. There never was. The bridge was silent except for the rhythmic hum of failing systems. The darkness outside wasn't just the absence of light. It was something alive, watching, waiting. The entity's whisper echoed through the ship, sinking into their minds like a creeping infection. Cole forced himself to think. If it had wanted them dead, they would be gone already. This wasn't just an execution. It was a test, a lesson, a punishment. But for what? Humanity had survived countless wars, had fought against impossible odds before, yet nothing they had ever faced felt like this. Reynolds was gripping the console so tightly his fingers had turned white. "Captain, we're still moving, but there's no propulsion, no force. It's just happening." Carter swallowed, staring at the screen. "We're descending." The display flickered, revealing a new sight below. A structure vast beyond comprehension, a labyrinth of shifting corridors and pulsating veins of something that looked almost metallic, but it moved, as if breathing. And at its core, a massive, gaping void. A doorway. An entrance. Cole clenched his jaw. "We're being taken inside." Then, without warning, the ship stopped. No inertia, no slowing, just an immediate, unnatural stillness. The tension in the air thickened. The whispering voice returned, weaving itself into their very thoughts. "Step forward." Carter's fingers hovered over the controls. "What do we do?" Cole exhaled. They had no weapons, no means of escape. Running was impossible, but standing still was worse. "We go." The airlock hissed open without command. The ship itself was being invited, or forced, to comply. The crew hesitated, but there was no alternative. One by one, they stepped onto the platform outside. The ground beneath them was smooth yet unnervingly warm. The walls shifted like muscles contracting, veins of light pulsing in unnatural rhythms. And ahead, at the center of the impossible structure, stood the figure from before. It hadn't moved, yet it was closer. Cole took a step forward. The whisper returned. "You have come seeking power, and now you will learn its cost." The void behind the figure opened, and something reached out. Darkness swallowed them. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a living force, wrapping around them like cold, skeletal fingers. The air felt thick, pressing against their lungs as if the very atmosphere resisted their presence. The crew stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away from the shifting void ahead. Then something stepped through. It wasn't the tall figure from before. This was something worse. It had no defined shape, no clear form. It was a mass of twisting, writhing limbs, shifting faces flickering across its surface, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The entity pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow, illuminating the chamber in brief flashes, revealing glimpses of horrors best left unseen. Reynolds stumbled back, barely able to whisper, "What is that?" The whispering voice returned, but this time it wasn't inside their heads. It came from everywhere, layered, overlapping, as if countless voices spoke as one. "You call yourselves explorers, conquerors, but you are neither." The figure raised an arm, or what passed for one. The ship trembled behind them, groaning under an unseen force. "You reached beyond your understanding. And now, you will pay the price." Cole stood firm, despite the sheer terror clawing at his mind. "We didn't come here to fight." The laughter returned. It wasn't amused. It was hungry. "But you did. Every species that rises believes itself to be above the consequences of its ambition. You are no different. And so, you will be unmade." The entity lunged. A shockwave of darkness surged toward them. And for a moment, Cole felt everything. The weight of 1,000 dead civilizations, echoes of screams lost to time, the crushing realization that this thing had done this before, and it would do it again. Then, just as suddenly, the wave stopped. Not because of mercy, but because something else had arrived. A sound, sharp and piercing, like reality itself being torn open. A new presence emerged, not from the darkness, but from the space beyond. A figure draped in something too bright to be seen, its form flickering between shapes, between possibilities. The darkness recoiled. The whispering voice faltered. No, not yet. The new arrival raised a hand. A single gesture. The walls of the chamber trembled, and for the first time, the entity took a step back. Cole barely had time to process what was happening before the whisper returned, this time directed only at him. You have been granted a reprieve, but the end remains the same. You are not ready for what lurks beyond the stars. The darkness vanished. The ship's alarms blared. Systems reactivated. The crew gasped as they found themselves back, not in the entity's domain, but drifting once more in open space. No explanation, no understanding. Only a single message left on the screen. Leave, before we change our minds. Cole exhaled. The crew exchanged looks, all carrying the same thought. They had survived, but they had not won. And whatever had saved them was something they didn't understand either.